to remind you, we're going to record this, and you're happy with that, to then be uploaded onto our YouTube channel tomorrow. That'll be great. But yeah, so good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Thomas. I'm the president of the Students' Union, and this evening we have Professor Michael Lee, who is the new Deputy Vice Chancellor to the university. So Michael's been with us a few months now, and I just thought it'd be a good introduction for him to get to know, to speak to some of you all, and also you might have seen an article he was published on the university website about this topic he's going to speak about tonight. So I will hand over to you, Michael, to take us through this evening.
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. I'll just share my screen. So can you see that okay, Thomas?
Yep, that's perfect, thank you.
Okay, great. So I'll just move that to there. Okay, thank you very much. And a big thank you to Thomas and the SU for the invitation to speak on this, I think, really important topic. And obviously it's been a lot in the press lately around sustainable diets. And as Thomas rightly said, I've just joined you as your new Deputy Vice Chancellor, and it's a great honour to be at Harper Adams. Unfortunately, joining during a global pandemic means that I haven't got the opportunity to meet the vast majority of you in person. But so I really, really welcome this opportunity to speak to you. So a little bit about me before I go on to it, and why I'm talking on this topic is, prior to joining Harper Adams, I was head of site at Rothamsted Research, the Northwick site of Rothamsted Research, and also a joint appointment at the University of Bristol Vet School as a professor in sustainable livestock systems. And for the last 7 years, my group has been looking at the role that livestock play in sustainable diets for healthy humans and a healthy planet. And it's vital within that context to consider the fact that it's not black and white. You know, there are shades of grey, and it's critically, really important when you're considering the role that livestock play in healthy diets, that you consider many, many metrics of sustainability. And that's really what I want to talk through. And this is based on research from my group at Rothamsted and Bristol over the last 7 or so years. So to start off, you know, as a species, we have not been good to this planet. And if we were any other species, based on the damage that we've put onto planet Earth, we will be talking about having a cull. There is no doubt. But of course, we're humans, and we can't consider having a cull of the human species, and that's not appropriate or right. But it's clear to show that we have had huge environmental impacts on our planet. And if you think about the planet as a biological system, you know, you can apply any biological system, you can apply a perturbation. Think of it as elastic band. So if you pull an elastic band, it has the ability to bounce back. And in biological systems, of course, we refer to that as homeostasis, the ability to respond to a perturbation or an impact and bounce back in a resilient way. And that's what defines biological systems, this ability to heal themselves. And of course, the planet as a biological system has the ability to heal itself. But this was some work, and it's published in Science by Rockstrom in 2009 and 2014. A fantastic piece of research, and please do have a look at those papers if you can. And what Rockstrom defined is Earth's planetary boundaries, where the perturbation applied by the human species, the population, applying onto the planet, has exceeded the natural elasticity of the planet to return to its natural ability. And what Rockstrom did was define key areas of perturbation which we've applied onto the planet, which will mean that it's no longer able to return to its original state. Our impact have exceeded the planetary boundaries ability to return. And Rockstrom defined climate change and chemical pollution and atmospheric pollution and biodiversity loss, change in land use, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle. And you can see in certain areas, we have now exceeded the ability of the planet to return. The planet will never be able to get back into a state it was before anthropogenic intervention. And that's particularly true on the nitrogen cycle, biodiversity loss, and climate change. Whereas for others, we've still got a chance to be able to return the planet into a safe operating space. So why is this? Why have humans applied such damage to the planet? Well, the first one, of course, is about huge population growth. And if you think about the amount of people on the planet, we're going to get to 9 billion people on the planet roughly by about 2050. And so what's driven that? Well, of course, what's driven that is advancement, the agricultural revolution, our ability to produce food and not be hunter-gatherers, and of course, the Industrial Revolution. All of that has allowed us to be able to feed a growing population from less resources. What's also driven this impact on the planet, of course, is our drive for economic growth, our drive for GDP. And as populations, countries, individuals get richer, they consume more. They want more resources, and therefore they grow and utilize more resources on the planet. A perfect example of this is associated with how we consume. And Sir John Beddington, the previous chief scientific officer, referred to the nutrition transition. And as countries and individuals get richer, they change the way they consume. They change the way they eat, and they move more to a Western style diet. And that often means a higher proportion of livestock products, particularly meat, within the diet. And this is a graph of the Earth, which basically shows the redder the country, the greater the increase in meat from 1961 to 2011. And this is particularly driven by increases in gross domestic product and increases in the richness of those countries. And you can see there's a major impact on China as it eats more. And of course, sustainability is all going to be driven by the amount we consume and the different products that we consume. So why is this increasing meat a concern when we think about planetary boundaries? Well, many analyses have basically shown that global warming potential, particularly driven by this IPCC metric of carbon dioxide equivalents per kilogram of product, is driven by changes in our consumption patterns of protein, and particularly associated with livestock protein, and within livestock, particularly ruminant protein. So this here maps out carbon dioxide equivalents per kilogram of product of major protein sources that we will consume in our diet. And you can see that our ruminant livestock, particularly grazing beef, sheep, meadow beef and feedlot beef, there's different aspects obviously of how we produce beef, have a much higher global warming potential using this metric than other livestock species, particularly monogastric livestock, for example, pork and chicken, and also much greater than plant-based proteins. So this metric has been used by the IPCC and scientists like myself in articles in Nature and Science to show that ruminant livestock are inherently unsustainable, and therefore the best way to deliver a sustainable planet is to remove livestock from our diet, or particularly remove ruminant livestock from our diet and replace them with other protein sources. Now, this is too simplistic. And the reason why this is too simplistic is that the IPCC, when they use this metric of carbon dioxide equivalents per kilogram of product, never intended it to be used in the way that people are using it. This is not a metric for sustainability. This is an indicator of global warming potential, and there are other aspects of sustainability. And even as an indicator of global warming potential, it is not a fair comparison. And I will try and prove that to you now. So why do I think that this particular metric is dangerous and has had its day? It's too simplistic on both sides of the equation: carbon dioxide equivalents and kilograms of product. So what is carbon dioxide equivalence? Well, carbon dioxide equivalence is about accumulating greenhouse gases. And we know there are three main greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Each of these greenhouse gases traps heat in the atmosphere, and they have different abilities to hold on to heat. Carbon dioxide, we'll say, has an ability of 1. Methane will have an ability of between 28 or 30, depending on which particular algorithm you use, but it basically tells you that it has the ability to hold more heat than carbon dioxide by 28 to 30 times. Nitrous oxide has an ability to hold heat between 280 and 300 times. So what carbon dioxide equivalence does is take each mole of these greenhouse gases and times them by their heat holding capacity, basically converting methane and nitrous oxide into carbon dioxide equivalents. So that's what carbon dioxide equivalence means. But of course, that only works if methane and nitrous oxide behave in the same way as carbon dioxide, as well as having a different heat holding capacity. But of course, they don't. Carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide are what we call stock pollutants. They stay in the atmosphere and they do not turn over, and for hundreds of years. Whereas methane is what we call a flow pollutant. It turns over, it breaks down, and it probably takes 10 to 12 years to break down into carbon dioxide. So if you look at this analysis, which is done from Professor Miles Allen at the University of Oxford, you will actually say under rising emissions, carbon dioxide and methane, have a look at this left-hand side graph here, you will show that because how it affects global warming, with both rising, carbon dioxide continuously increases, and so does methane. But because carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere, it starts to become curvilinear. It starts to move exponentially in terms of warming potential. But because methane turns over, it stays as a linear rise in global warming. If you look at constant emissions, so CO2 and methane, CO2 will still increase global warming potential, but methane will retain global warming because it turns over. So you're replacing the methane that was there from the methane that turned over under constant emissions. Under falling emissions, you will see that carbon dioxide will retain and heat to plateau because you've still got that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But methane, because it turns over, will drop warming potential. So it's not fair to consider all greenhouse gases as the same as carbon dioxide equivalents. So that's one reason why using that metric is not appropriate to compare global warming, and particularly not to compare methane and carbon dioxide. And we all know there's an issue associated with methane and livestock production. The other really important component of why this equation is not a fair comparison is associated with kilograms of product. What is a kilogram of product when it comes to food? Does a kilogram of carrots provide the same nutrients as a kilogram of lamb? Does a kilogram of lamb provide the same nutrients as a kilogram of chicken or beef or pork? So what I've done in this analysis, or research that my colleagues and I have done at Rothamsted, is to compare first and foremost livestock species when we're thinking about nutrient density. Because one of the indicators around sustainability has said, well, actually, if you don't want to leave livestock out of your diet, then at least move from beef to chicken because they have a lower global warming potential. So in this analysis, we're looking at nutrient density of different livestock products. So the reason why livestock products are in an Eat Well guide, if you have a look at any nutritionist balanced diet, they will have a proportion of livestock protein. And the reason why the livestock protein is there is because it delivers these nutrients on the left-hand side more efficiently than other components of the diet, particularly protein, monounsaturated fatty acids, long chain omega-3, but of course the best source of long chain omega-3 is fish, some minerals, calcium, iron, and some critical B vitamins, riboflavin, folic acid, vitamin B12, some other minerals, selenium and zinc. But also, of course, livestock products are usually associated with high levels of sodium and high levels of saturated fats. So what I've done in this analysis is determine the RDI, the recommended daily intake of these key nutrients, and then determine the amount that a 100-gram serving of these different livestock proteins would provide when produced in different ways. So, and this is classically based from UK production systems. So concentrate beef, forage beef, intensive chicken, free-range chicken, lowland upland lamb, and intensive pork. And 100 grams of these different meats would provide this amount of the RDIs, you can see. So once you've got all these positive numbers, you've also got to consider these negative numbers underneath in terms of, because we often consume too much salt and saturated fats. So then what we did was to have a look at the percentage RDI. So the percentage of those key nutrients that 100 grams of these meats would provide. And then we compared the different livestock products. And if you have a look in terms of at our RDI level, so the amounts of these key nutrients that it provide, beef performs best in terms of nutrient density, over and above chicken, with lamb second, and then pork, because of the high nutrient density of beef. Now that throws on our head the previous assumption. And if you have a look then at, so the previous assumption when looking at global warming potential based on livestock proteins, so this is carbon dioxide equivalents per 100 grams of meat, you'll actually see that chicken performs best because it has lower emissions per 100 gram of meat. But as we showed that the nutrient density is higher with beef, if you then compare carbon dioxide equivalents, so global warming potential per delivery of the key nutrients, you'd actually find that beef is more sustainable than chicken based on this particular metric because of the high nutrient density of beef, which is the complete opposite to what we've been told when you compare carbon dioxide equivalents per kilogram of product. But of course, it's not just about comparison between livestock proteins. We also need to consider against plant-based proteins. And why that becomes really complex is that actually livestock proteins and plant-based proteins have different digestibilities. So that's availability of the amino acids within the small intestine for absorption, but also in terms of the composition of those proteins in terms of essential amino acids. So when you're comparing protein, you have to correct for the composition of the amino acids and the digestibility. What I've done in this analysis is to actually look at the digestibility of the proteins. And when you have a look at the digestibility of the proteins, you can see for peas, groundnuts, and tofu, which are plant-based proteins, as you increase the metric associated with how digestible that protein is, you can actually see it ramps up in terms of its global warming potential. So it becomes less sustainable when you take into account the digestibility of the protein. However, for livestock proteins, because they're highly digestible, you will see that it actually retains itself. And so eggs, poultry, and pigs, when you take into account protein digestibility, which is the final orange bar, you will actually see is more sustainable in this metric than tofu. So, but of course, what's wrong with that analysis is it does not consider the fact that we don't eat single food items. We don't eat just tomatoes or bread, and we certainly don't just eat meat. And of course, we shouldn't do. We should eat a healthy, balanced diet. And that's what this symbol is depicting here. So what I'm considering here is the Eat Well guide. And if you look at any human nutritionist advice to how to eat and consume responsibly, they will say you need to consider 3 main areas of your diet. Carbohydrate, which is usually driven by breads, rice, or potatoes. Protein, which should have a balance between livestock and plant-based, and the reason for that we'll come on to in a moment. And fresh fruit and vegetables, because we need a good supply of fiber and water-soluble vitamins. So when you're comparing the impact of different food ingredients, you always need to consider what they're consumed with. So what we did in this analysis is to consider different protein sources with different combinations of fresh fruit and vegetables and carbohydrate, and then determine the nutrient density that's delivered from the protein sources. So what we did in this analysis was to compare different feed plates. So carrots, tomatoes, or cucumbers, always with apples to supply the fiber, the vitamins, and the water-soluble components. And then against either potatoes, bread, or rice, which provides the carbohydrate. And then the protein source was either beef, pork, or tofu. And when we compare these different protein ingredients, we determined the nutrient density associated with them. So how good these different proteins were at delivering the key nutrients that you need for life that we've just defined within that previous table. So protein, B vitamins, key minerals, key essential fatty acids. And here within red, we've got uncapped. So uncapped means that you consider the quality of that protein over and above when it hits your requirement. So for example, for vitamin B12, 100 grams of beef will provide 133% of your vitamin B12 requirements. So that's uncapped. It basically means that you can have too much of a good thing. You can keep on adding up the value of those nutrients. But of course, as soon as you hit your requirements, then adding more vitamin B12 is not going to be benefit to your health or your diet. So that's uncapped. Whereas capped, we're basically saying, well, as soon as you hit your requirements for your key nutrients, you don't add any more benefit from providing more vitamin C or vitamin B12 or vitamin B6 or essential fatty acids. So what you can see here is that when you compare uncapped or capped, actually the nutritional value of beef is significantly higher than the nutritional value of tofu. And that's because beef is so different to potatoes, bread, and rice, carrots, tomatoes, and cucumbers in the key nutrients it contains. Whereas tofu, because it's a plant-based protein, is much more in tune with the other parts of the plate. So you get less of an advantage through using your plant-based protein than you would from using an animal-based protein. What about nutrient density in terms of, what about global warming potential, kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents per nutrient density? Well, here you can still show that tofu has a lower environmental footprint than beef. However, the difference is so much smaller. The difference between tofu and pork is only 1.3, and the difference between tofu and beef is only 2.2. And what this doesn't include is bioavailability. and bioavailability of key nutrients when you consume beef with plant-based products or a livestock protein with plant-based proteins is significantly higher because of the law of limiting returns. So as soon as you have the first limiting amino acid, if you can replace it with, as soon as you hit the first rate limiting steps, so for example, limiting amino acids, then the protein that you use or the protein you consume will not be used as efficiently. Whereas beef, because of its very different amino acid profile, you're much less likely to hit the first limiting amino acid when you consume beef as opposed to tofu. Or you would have to significantly eat more tofu than beef.
Okay. Michael, sorry, we've just had a question coming in saying, when nutritional information is displayed on a product, does the protein include all protein and not digestible protein?
So no, it includes all protein. So this is one of the biggest issues actually with nutrient indicators on packs, and this is a major issue associated when you're choosing sustainability of diet. The best indicator for protein quality is DIAS. It's called digestible indispensable amino acid scores, and that basically gives you an assessment how good that protein is in terms of the amino acids it contains and the digestibility of that protein. Now, the reason why supermarkets and feed packs don't include that information is because, of course, you can deliver all the essential amino acids you need, and you can deliver all the digestibility by eating any protein. You just need to eat more of it. But and this is why it's so important to consider balance in your diet. A small amount of animal-based protein will significantly reduce the amount of protein you need to consume as part of a healthy, balanced diet. So going back to that score about an omnivorous diet delivering sustainability is because a small amount of livestock protein will significantly reduce the amount of plant-based protein you need. It's all about balance. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is continue a discussion around other aspects of sustainability. So another critical view when you think about sustainability of food systems is if we're going to feed a growing population and we wish to retain our biodiverse land, so the Amazon, the steppes, the Pampinas, then we need to say that, well, okay, we don't want any more agricultural land encroachment. And if we're going to feed a growing population with the same agricultural land we've got, because we don't want to lose any more biodiversity, the only way we're going to do that is to use our agricultural land more efficiently. And the way that we'll use our agricultural land more efficiently is the best soils and the best land will be used for growing crops to feed humans, not livestock. And the role that livestock will have is to utilize land not suitable for growing crops or to utilize byproducts or waste streams from the food industry, the agri-food industry. Now that's a pathway to sustainable land use. Now, if you consider this metric of arable land use as a key indicator of sustainability, and then we compare different protein sources, you will actually show that lamb performs better than any protein. So this is the amount of arable land used in meters squared to produce 100 grams of product. And here you can see that lamb outperforms chicken, pork, and beef. And if you have a look at arable land use for delivery of those key nutrients, which we've already described in our Eat Well guide, you will see that lamb delivers higher levels of RDI per meter squared of arable land than any protein source. So that's another metric looking at another metric of sustainability, looking at different proteins, and here lamb performs best. So what I want to do now is just to give you an example of how we've scaled this work up, because what I've shown you so far has really been about looking at diets and plates of different foods and basically looking at an Excel spreadsheet and analyzing those nutrients. But what does it mean at a country scale? So we've been doing a lot of work with France and INRA, and in France they have what, like counties in the UK, but they're basically regions of agriculture. So 571 regions of France, which are split up as agricultural land units. They call them these petites régions agricoles. And if you speak French, you know that was perfect. And what we did within each of those regions of France, we analysed the production of protein, particularly livestock protein, within each of these regions. So we said, for in each region, we scored them from 0 to 1, based on their ruminant share. So if that region had no livestock protein produced from ruminants, we called it 0. And if they had 100% of the livestock protein produced from ruminants, we called it 1. We then analysed the nutrient index, or the RDI, associated with these livestock proteins, be it meat, milk, and eggs. And we performed an LCA, this life cycle analysis, on the global warming potential of these different livestock products. We also then looked at the arable land use to produce these livestock proteins, and we include displaced land, so land for importing feed from South America or outside France or outside these petite regions agricoles. Okay, so that's the analysis. Right, I'll talk you through these slides. So what we show here, along the x-axis, is the ruminant share of these regions of France. So as I said, you know, there is 571 regions in France. So there's 571 dots on this graph, and you can count them if you like. So along the x-axis goes from 0 to 1. So 0 basically says there is no ruminant livestock produced in that region. 1 says all the livestock in that region are ruminants, and you can see the distribution across within France. And on the y-axis is the nutrient index per arable land use. So this is the number of people you can feed, hitting all their nutrient requirements per hectare of arable land. And you can see as you increase the amount of ruminant-based livestock, you can feed more people per unit of arable land. So what we looked then was to say, okay, well, that's based on arable land. What about global warming potential? Because we know that ruminants have a higher global warming potential than monogastric livestock. So what about that impact? So that's what we did in this analysis. This, again, same x-axis, ruminant share, and on the y-axis this time is the nutrient index per global warming potential. So the number of people you can feed per ton of carbon dioxide equivalents emitted. And surprisingly, it still showed that the high ruminant share regions could feed more people per ton of carbon dioxide than the regions without ruminants. And the reason for that was, even though monogastric regions did improve, ruminant regions kept up due to their high nutrient density, based on that analysis we showed. But of course, there is this bimodal distribution. There are some regions that are doing phenomenally well, and there's some regions that are doing phenomenally badly. The regions that are doing phenomenally well were the regions associated with really fantastic grassland grazing management and a circular bioeconomy of utilizing and recycling waste streams. So using byproducts from the food industry to go into high-yielding dairy cows or highly productive beef systems. Whereas the regions that were doing badly were predominantly either utilizing land which was suitable for growing crops or using too much cereals or concentrates to produce the same amount of ruminant output. So what is sustainability? Geez, it's complex, guys. And it's certainly not as simple as moving livestock from your diet. Sustainability, as I've started to show, is extremely complex. And it has to deliver all 3 pillars. It has to deliver societal need. So high quality food that's going to be inherently healthy. It has to deliver economic need. So it's got to deliver businesses that make profits, encourage young people like yourselves to want to become the agriculturalists of the future. The big changes, the big major entrepreneurial shifts that we're going to need within, not just within the UK, but globally, has to be in agriculture. The way that we feed and utilize resources has to change. So new agricultural developments is what we critically need. And to deliver that, we need farmers to be able to make a profit, because otherwise we won't have good people becoming the next farmers. And the third one, whilst delivering products that society wants and are inherently healthy, delivering profitable, thriving farm businesses, we also need to protect the environment. We need to be the first generation that leaves this planet in a better state than we found it. So that's about utilizing resources extremely well. And central to that is soil health. Central to any farm business being profitable, providing high quality nutrition to people and ensuring you protect the environment is soil health and management. So where does that link with livestock? So I want to now show you some detailed analysis and detailed research that we carried out at Rothamsted in a project I led before I left the Institute. And what this shows is the importance of carbon within soil, okay? So on the left-hand show, you can see these X-ray tomographies of grassland soil, arable soil, and degraded soil. So basically that's like an X-ray of soil. It's like, instead of showing your bones, what it shows is air spaces. So next to that X-ray tomography, you can see these little cartoons of what it's basically showing. So in the degraded soil, you have less air spaces and smaller pores connecting those spaces, what we call decrypt. In an arable soil, you have slightly larger, but the best connected, largest pores, this largest decrypt, is found in grassland soils. So why is that important? Well, if you look at the next graph called with connected porosity on the x-axis and hydraulic conductivity on the y-axis. So what the x-axis, connected porosity, so how connected these pores are. And you can see here, this is associated with the amount of carbon you've got in your soil. So these circles are the amount of carbon that is stored in soil. And why that's important is because the greater the connected porosity is, the greater the hydraulic conductivity is. So how water can move through that soil. And why that's important, if you look at the last graph here, which looks at matrix potential, so basically how wet a soil is, and an anoxic proportion, so how quickly that soil loses oxygen and therefore loses microbial control and microbial processes that are assimilatory. So they'll take the nutrients you put into soil and make organic matter. So they will take inorganic fertilizer, organic fertilizer, and make grass, wheat, potatoes. They will allow nutrients to move from the soil into plant mass. That's the importance of having oxygen and microbial matter within the soil. So as you increase the amount of carbon, you drive down the anoxic proportion. So you have more assimilatory process and less dissimilatory processes. So a healthier soil is driven by carbon, and you get higher levels of carbon in grassland soil. So this is another part of that analysis, which is basically what we did in this project is we analysed 40,000 soils across the UK. And we found that 40% of arable soils were degraded, 7% of grasslands were degraded, and 6% of forest soils were degraded. So grassland soils were no different in terms of health than forestry soils. And the way that we determined whether a soil was degraded or not was the ratio of soil organic carbon to clay. Because the amount of clay you have in the soil will determine how much organic carbon it can store. So it's clearly that our arable soils are suffering. Now, that doesn't mean you can't produce crops, wheat, oats. You can't put high yields on a degraded soil. You can, but you just need to put more inorganic fertilizer in. And if we're going to have a sustainable future and a sustainable planet and grow more food for less people with less resources, we need massively to reduce the amount of fossil fuel we use and therefore drive down the amount of inorganic fertilizer we need to grow arable crops. What is the solution? Livestock. This is an analysis which is carried out on Rothamsted's long-term experiments. 175 years of looking at soil health. And by far the best way of returning health, organic matters to soils is through farmyard manure or grazing after arable. So if we're thinking about a world without livestock, how are we going to ensure that arable soils are protected and return to health? So that's a critical component of delivering sustainability. Just to show this point really, really clearly. So this is a resource that we had at Northwick called the Northwick Farm Platform. And what the Northwick Farm Platform allowed us to do was to have a look at different farm systems and measure a whole array of different metrics of sustainability, be they loss of nutrients into water, be they greenhouse gases, be they soil health. And what we did here is to compare two different farms, and we collected over 9 million data points of lost nutrients from those farms. So the orange farm is a converted grassland to arable farm. So that's just basically saying if we removed livestock from grasslands and converted grasslands to arable production, what would happen in terms of loss of nutrients into water? The green farm is a grassland farm. So I think you can see here that when we had a storm event, the orange here, and you can see this brown chocolate milkshake colored water leaving the farm. And on the green here, you can see this like whiskey colored water leaving the farm. And then the graph in the middle shows the loss of suspended sediment, which contains organic carbon and key nutrients associated with an arable and a grassland farm. Clearly showing that you cannot just convert grassland farms to arable. There's a reason why they're grassland, and that's critically important to retain those nutrients in those environments. So doing that conversion will have a huge impact on environmental parameters. So delivering sustainability is complex. I think I've emphasized that. And I've only really talked about a UK scenario where we're a temperate grassland environment. But if we're going to consider the role that livestock, and particularly ruminant livestock, are going to have on the planet, we need to consider it in all different production systems and different ecoclimates. So we need to consider how different types of ruminant livestock, different breeds, different species, and different production methodologies tie together for a pathway for sustainability. In other words, there's no single one blueprint. So a methodology of the most sustainable way that might work in the UK will not work in Africa, will not work in North America. So how do we deliver these pathways of different ways of producing ruminants most sustainably? So that's why we formed this global farm platform. And I'd encourage you all to have a look at, if you're interested in sustainability and particularly interested in the role that livestock can play. And within this network, we've had a whole array of different partners. I'll just jump to this. So this shows the number of farms and the number of partners. We've got 15 research farms around the world, 24 institutes. And I'm delighted to say that Harper Adams will be joining this group, and we'll be moving our farm to a net zero farm over a period of time, working with Scott and the team and working with all the academics associated with how we deliver the most sustainable farm for our students and for our research and for the UK, working along with these other farms around the globe. And please also have a look at this paper, which we produced in 2014, which was published in Nature, which highlights the 6 things we need to consider when we think about sustainable livestock. So the first one, competition with human edible feed, poor animal health and welfare, making sure you're matching your genotypes to the environment. So i.e. not just picking up a Holstein high genetic merit animal and dropping them in India or dropping them in Africa and expecting them to perform the same as they would do in Shropshire. Environmental impact, quality and waste, husbandry and management. All those are vitally important. These are just some of the farms associated with these. I'm probably talking too long, so I'll try and wrap up now, Thomas, as quickly as I can. So I've talked about livestock and their role in food, but it's also important to remember as we start to advocate a pathway to sustainability, considering the role of livestock, that of course livestock are more than just food. They have a vital role to play in rural communities and aesthetics and biodiversity. And despite what George Monbiot says, I actually think that our green and pleasant land is beautiful. It's a rich part of our heritage. It's a rich part of this land. And livestock play a critical role in maintaining the rich biodiversity of grasslands. And as I've already shown, grasslands are the most important terrestrial source and lockup of carbon. Also, livestock play a vital role in many parts of the world associated where we don't have traction or use in fossil fuels. They have a vital role to play in subsistence farms. We also need to rediscover natural fibres. If we are going to wean ourselves off damaging fossil fuels, damaging plastics, then we need to discover natural fibres, particularly, be they plant-based or be they livestock-based. Also, livestock products are everywhere, and so they should be, as part of a circular economy. If an animal is given its life for our sustenance to provide key nutrients, we need to make sure we utilize every part of that animal as efficiently as we can. And often that is a more sustainable use than can be what we consider plant-based alternatives. So for example, it's not as black and white as saying all livestock products are environmentally damaging and all plant-based solutions are environmentally benign. Take the example of palm oil. Palm oil, the huge rise in requirements for palm oil was driven by the fact that we wanted to strip out stearate, animal fat from products. So we used a plant-based saturated oil and destroyed vast amounts of biodiversity close to the extinction of the orangutan. I would rather have some animal fat in my pecan pie and still have orangutans on this planet than think about the loss of that biodiversity to replace and use a plant-based alternative. So we must be very careful when we consider a view that plant-based alternatives are always better when it comes to the environment. That's not necessarily the case. We need to consider the use of animal byproducts. I've already mentioned the vital role that livestock play in soil health, and I won't go back into that again. I've emphasized that enough. And the final point here is my favorite picture. I've been lucky enough to work with goats in Africa. And these farms refer to these animals as their bio-ATMs. They don't have cash points. They don't have bank accounts. And when the weather is bad and their crops fail, they still have the most resilient thing on their farm, which is their small ruminants. There's some analysis which we did in association with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also some GCRF projects, which looked at what was the best indicator of resilience within a subsistence farm. What ensured that children were educated, children were nourished, that women controlled the household economics and were also educated. The single most important indicator of these was the presence of a goat. So actually the resilience that these livestock can deliver in these parts of the world is critically important. So Thomas, I've probably way overran. I apologize. But the point is, livestock are part of the solution for sustainable global food security. But great care must be given when developing metrics and determining their role. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. And no, don't worry about the time at all. I had someone go on for about 2 hours just before Christmas, so I shouldn't worry, shouldn't worry too much. So a couple of comments coming in. The first one saying some evidence suggests New Zealand can produce lamb with a lower GWP than the UK, even incorporating transportation. Should the UK agricultural industry accept these imports as more sustainable?
Well, you're defining sustainability as just one metric, which is global warming potential, which I hopefully emphasize that it's not. There's many aspects of sustainability which we need to consider. Supporting our sheep industry within the UK is a critical component of sustainability, supporting rural communities, supporting soil health. And I don't believe actually that New Zealand per se can produce lamb with a lower global warming potential all the time. It's seasonal and it's seasonality. And that's what we also need to consider when we think about food production. So British lamb has a vital role to play as part of the delivery of a sustainable protein. And that's including all metrics of sustainability, including economics, environmental, and social. But also we need to consider seasonality and when it's right to import and look at these and the balances of our partners in other parts of the world. You're right to say about the impact of transportation on global warming. Often that is over-egged. The global warming potential or the carbon footprint associated with transportation is often very small. The biggest impact when you think about livestock on their footprint of food production is usually enteric fermentation, so how efficiently you can produce it. So the reason why probably New Zealand lamb in those metrics is looking better in terms of global warming potential is how their industry has developed post the removal of subsidy. We need to support our farms in ensuring efficient lamb production with the removal of subsidy, and that will make us be and hit that global warming potential metric better than New Zealand. But it's not the sole metric of sustainability.
Great, thank you. We've got the questions flying in. Someone's just saying, campaigners vilifying livestock farming conveniently forget to mention the harm done to the planet by arable farmers, like deforestation, soil erosion, eutrophication, pesticide, fertilizer pollution, CO2 removal capacity, etc. Any impact assessment should be holistic rather than myopic vilification.
Yeah, totally agree. And as I indicated there, when you're looking at land conversion, what's often included when you think about the global warming potential of livestock products is the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest, often not actually considering what it's done for. Some of it is for grazing livestock, which is wrong. We should not be doing that, of course. Some of it's for soybean. But when we also consider plant-based protein, we must consider the conversion of grasslands from grazing livestock into plants and consider that. So we need to consider all metrics of sustainability when we're thinking about our different proteins and think of it as a balanced level. But let's be clear about this. We overconsume livestock products. We shouldn't be consuming the level that we are currently consuming in the West. We underconsume fruit and vegetables. We need to consume as a nation more of these. So it's holistically looking about the balance of what we consume as part of an Eat Well diet. Livestock have a critical role to play, as do fresh fruit and vegetables. The issue, and I mentioned this in the issue, and I mentioned this in the article which I put on the website, or the university put on the website. The issue associated with food and health is overconsumption and over-processing, and that's the same whether it be a plant-based product or a livestock-based product.
Brilliant, thank you. Kerry saying, considering 20% increase of households expecting one member becoming a red meat conscious eater, how can we successfully promote a meat diet in a population misinformed about livestock production?
Yeah, it's very difficult because we're the first urbanized society. So i.e. we're the first country in the world where we had more people living in cities than in rural communities. So as a nation, we're probably the most removed from how food is produced. And and the anti-livestock brigade have used that fact to misinform an awful lot of people, because they haven't got the basic understanding of how food is produced or how agriculture works. So what we need to do, we need to ensure that people are educated very early on, primary school education on how food is produced and the importance of different food ingredients in their diet. And then they can make informed choices, because once you've got a basic understanding, it's very hard for someone to give you misinformation. If you have no background information, misinformation is easy to swallow. And once you then believe you've formed an opinion, you can't change your mind. And that, because it becomes emotive, and that's very difficult. So education is critically important, but it is also about balance. There is nothing wrong with individuals choosing a vegan diet. Nothing wrong at all. What is wrong is when individuals play on veganuary or veganism as a pathway to sustainability, and that livestock are demons and plant-based solutions are the only solution forward. The science, the data is not there to support that. But equally, there is nothing wrong with individuals saying, I have decided not to consume livestock products. I want to consume plant-based products. There is nothing wrong with that.
Brilliant. Bradley's asking, early on in the presentation, you made a distinction between grazed beef and meadow beef on one of the graphs. What is the difference between these?
Yeah, this was some data which we were comparing different ways that you could raise livestock. So pasture-based beef will be critically more higher quality grassland systems, and meadow beef will be more, multifunctional swards, prairie grasslands, those sort of systems. So sorry, yeah, that wasn't very clear.
That's
Good
great.
question.
Thank you. Emily's asking, there are so many different factors involved in sustainability. What do you think the best way of deciding what food to buy? And do you think there is potential for labeling to be developed to help people make better decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. So the example I gave you, I'm sorry I had to rush through those in terms of the plates, was actually a piece of work looking at how we could inform consumers when they were making their protein purchase decisions. So say, for example, you're in a supermarket and you say, well, I quite fancy, potatoes, and I quite fancy some courgettes. And okay, based on this, what protein should I have nutritionally, which will be the most sustainably for me and the planet? And based on the key nutrients that those other ingredients contain, it could tell you which protein would be most sustainable if you wanted to go down that route. So it's a more complex way of developing information for consumers. But of course, retailers like simple messages, as consumers do. They like traffic lights. They like, good, bad, salt, bad. Actually, but we need salt. Okay, salt, good. No, but levels. Fat, bad. No, yeah, but we need fat. Okay, fat, good. And it becomes complicated. They love simple method. So the way that we're trying to work with retailers is to use apps for this. So people and consumers can go in and just say, I'm choosing these different ingredients. And then the app will do the analysis for you and say which protein is most sustainable to match the different parts of your diet. But again, saying all this, sustainability can only be driven by moderate, responsible consumption. Because livestock products are more nutrient dense, they are more environmentally damaging, but you need less of them. And it will then increase the nutrient uptake and bioavailability of the rest of the plate. You'll utilize the plant-based components more efficiently because you've got a little bit of animal protein on there. And that's the key message. You will need less total food because you've consumed a little bit of livestock. And that's why an omnivorous diet is a pathway to sustainability.
That's brilliant. Thank you. A slightly more general question. Someone has messaged me who wasn't able to attend, and they said they'd watched the answer back on the recording. Just about the Oatly adverts and the statistics used in them, and what your views were on those adverts, if you've seen them.
Which adverts? I'm not aware.
The Oatly ones. I think it's the plant. They're a plant-based milk brand. I've seen them on Twitter a bit today, but I'm not too entirely sure what he is referring to exactly.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm not, but I can just give a general overview on some of what I perceive as misinformation associated with some of these adverts or some of these products. And I'll give you a perfect example. A lot of these products have been pushed to say they are a complete replacement to milk. And that's not true, because if you look at the nutrient content of milk compared to these juices, these plant juices, you'll see that it's not the same. So replacing milk with a plant juice will not give you the same nutrient requirements, particularly things like calcium, vitamin K, the B vitamins, selenium and zinc. Vital that we have high levels of high quality dairy. And it's misinformation to say that these plant-based products will completely replace them. What some companies have done is to biofortify these products. And then say, well, actually, they have got these nutrients in because we've added them in. Also, they often contain high levels of sugar, which is obviously extremely dangerous. We know when we consume way too much processed sugar. But the issue with just biofortifying, as we all know, of course, that we absorb nutrients associated as food matrices and in the matrix that they contain. So I remember a discussion I had with one of my students at Bristol when I was comparing, I think it was a nut juice with milk, and we were looking at vitamin K. And I said, these nut juices don't contain vitamin K. And she actually said, well, no, Michael, you're wrong. It does contain vitamin K. It's there. It's on the label. And I said, okay, well, what is vitamin K? Well, it's a fat-soluble vitamin. Okay, well, what's the fat content of that nut juice? Well, it's 0. Okay, so how are you going to absorb the vitamin K? It contains it, but you may as well not contain it because you're not going to absorb it. You're just going to urinate it out. As I think I used a different phrase at the time. So you need to think about not just what it contains, but how it's going to absorb. And going also back to these issues around some plant-based juices is the high levels of fructose that they contain. And of course, that's extremely damaging. And if you think about the 3 most damaging food ingredients of all time: sugar, plant-based; palm oil, plant-based; alcohol, plant-based. So to say that all plant-based are environmentally benign and healthy is wrong. It's processing that causes those issues.
Yeah. We've just got a question come in. As the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, what is the best advice you can give students graduating and going into the livestock-based sector?
Oh, that's a good question. So, I want to encourage all our students, whether they go into the livestock sector, whether they go into the arable sector, whether they go into agricultural engineering, whether they become agribusiness students, whether they become vets, vet nurses, vet physios, the lot. I want to support you all, of course. And the key thing is passion. And I hope that I've showed to you that I've got to where I am because I'm passionate about my subject, which is, sustainable agriculture. And when I hear mistruths, we've got to be driven by evidence. And if people say something to you, have an open mind, listen to them, of course, but think, okay, well, what's the evidence this is based on? let me think about this and consider this, and don't vilify people's views and how they act and how they are. Think about what they're saying, but then base your opinion on evidence and science, and really drive at saying, okay, passion about our agricultural industry within the UK and how we are going to make our agricultural industry the most sustainable, the best it can be, the producing high quality food, whether it be plant-based or livestock-based, and in one with the environment. That's the great challenge for Harper Adams. That's why it's such a great university, and why I'm glad to be here, because we are the best sector university in this area, and that's what we want our students to do and have a real impact. So my advice is have passion. And if you don't have passion for what you're doing, then you're in the wrong sector.
That's brilliant. And I think, we haven't got any other questions. And I think that's a really good point for us to finish on tonight. So thank you, Michael, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and for watching. Like I say, this has been recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel tomorrow. So if you want to go back and watch again, feel free, share it around with colleagues, other students. You never know when you might want some of this information again. But no, thank you very much, Michael, for your time. It's been really good to hear from you this evening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you all for listening. And I hope you're all okay. And we know all the staff at Harper Adams know how challenging it is for you all at this time, and we are thinking about the hard impact that COVID's had. But it will get better, and we will be back in class, and we will all meet in person one day soon. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Thomas, as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael. Good night, everyone.